Hello, and welcome to our video on the 10 richest men in history. Throughout time, there have been some incredibly wealthy individuals whose fortunes have surpassed even the wildest dreams of most people. Today, we will take a closer look at the top 10 richest men in history and explore how they amassed their fortunes. Before I start the video, I wish you to support the channel by subscribing to it, activating the bell button and the committee for the video, and giving you in the comments about the video a pleasant viewing. Mansa Musa lived 1280 to 1337. Country, Mali. Wealth, richer than anyone could describe. Mansa Musa was the ruler of the Kingdom of Mali from 1312 degrees Celsius E to 1337 degrees Celsius E. During his reign, Mali was one of the richest kingdoms of Africa, and Mansa Musa was among the richest individuals in the world. The ancient kingdom of Mali spread across parts of modern-day Mali, Senegal, the Gambia, Guinea, Niger, Nigeria, Chad, Mauritania, and Burkina Faso. Mansa Musa developed cities like Timbuktu and Gao into important cultural centers. He also brought architects from the Middle East and across Africa to design new buildings for his cities. Mansa Musa turned the kingdom of Mali into a sophisticated center of learning in the Islamic world. Mansa Musa came to power in 1312 degrees Celsius E. After the previous king, Abu Bakr II, disappeared at sea. Mansa Abu Bakr II had departed on a large fleet of ships to explore the Atlantic Ocean and never returned. Mansa Musa inherited a kingdom that was already wealthy, but his work in expanding trade made Mali the wealthiest kingdom in Africa. His riches came from mining significant salt and gold deposits in the Mali kingdom. Elephant ivory was another major source of wealth. Augustus Caesar lived 63 BC, 14 AD. Country, Rome. Wealth, $4.6 trillion. Augustus Caesar's power and wealth were truly remarkable. As the leader of an empire that generated between 25% and 30% of the world's economic output, he held a position of great influence. Additionally, he was reputed to have amassed a personal fortune that equaled 1/5 of his empire's economy, as noted by Stanford history professor Ian Morris. This astounding wealth would be worth approximately $4.6 trillion in today's money. In fact, Morris even claims that Augustus was the sole owner of Egypt for a period of time. Such a level of economic and political dominance is difficult to surpass. Emperor Shenzong lived 148,185. Country, China. Wealth, ruled empire with 25% to 30% of global GDP. China's Song dynasty was one of the most economically powerful empires of all time. According to Professor Ronald A. Edwards, a Chinese economic historian of the Song dynasty at Tamkang University, the nation accounted for between 25% and 30% of the world's economic output during its peak. The empire's wealth came from both its technological innovations and extreme skill at tax collection, which Edwards says was hundreds of years ahead of European governments. The professor also noted the Song dynasty's government was highly centralized, meaning the emperor held enormous control over the economy. Akbar I lived 142,165. Country, India. Wealth, ruled empire with 25% of global GDP. As the greatest emperor of India's Mughal dynasty, Akbar's wealth was vast and impressive. His empire accounted for about 1/4 of global economic output, according to Fortune's Chris Matthews. Economic historian Angus Maddison speculates that India's GDP per capita under Akbar was comparable to Elizabethan England, but with a ruling class whose extravagant lifestyle surpassed that of European society. Akbar's wealth was in part due to the significant economic prosperity of the Mughal Empire during his reign, but it was also a result of his personal wealth. Like other powerful rulers of his time, he had access to vast amounts of wealth that were used to finance his imperial ambitions, fund the construction of grand buildings and monuments, and support the lavish lifestyles of his courtiers and himself. Despite his wealth and power, Akbar was known for his relatively simple and modest lifestyle, preferring to spend his money on charitable projects and public works rather than extravagant displays of personal wealth. Joseph Stalin lived 1,878,195. Country, USSR. Wealth, complete control of a nation with 9.6% of global GDP. Joseph Stalin was a dictator who had absolute power over the Soviet Union, one of the largest economies in the world during his reign. While it is difficult to separate his personal wealth from that of the Soviet Union, multiple economists have nominated him as one of the richest people of all time due to his unique combination of economic might and control. In 1950, 3 years before Stalin's death, the Soviet Union accounted for approximately 9.5% of global economic output, which would be equivalent to nearly $7.5 trillion in 2019. Although this wealth did not belong directly to Stalin, he had the power to leverage the Soviet Union's economic resources for his personal gain. According to George O. Leiber, a professor of history at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, Stalin controlled 1/6 of the land surface of the planet without any checks or balances, giving him enormous power to have anything he wanted. However, whether Stalin could be considered one of the wealthiest men in history is debatable, as his wealth was tied to the wealth of the country he controlled. Nevertheless, his personal economic influence remains unrivaled in recent history. Andrew Carnegie lived 1,835,191. Country, United States. Wealth, $372 billion. Rockefeller gets all the press, but Andrew Carnegie may be the richest American of all time. The Scottish immigrant sold his company, U.S. Steel, to J.P. Morgan for $480 million in 1901. That sum equates to about slightly over 2.1% of U.S. GDP at the time, giving Carnegie economic power equivalent to $372 billion in 2019. John D. Rockefeller lived 1,839,193. Country, United States. Wealth, $341 billion. Rockefeller began investing in the petroleum industry in 1863. And by 1880 his Standard Oil Company controlled 90% of American oil production. Rockefeller's obituary in the New York Times stated that he was estimated to have a net worth of approximately $1.5 billion based on his 1918 federal income tax return and overall fortune calculations. This amount was equivalent to almost 2% of the United States economic output for that year, as per Measuring Worth's data, which should be noted that the U.S. did not have official records on national income until 1932. The same economic share in 2019 would be equivalent to $341 billion. Alan Rufus lived 140,193. Country, England. Wealth, $194 billion. The nephew of William the Conqueror, Rufus joined his uncle in the Norman Conquest. He died with £11,000 according to Philip Beresford and Bill Rubenstein, authors of The Richest of the Rich, which they say amounted to 7% of England's GDP at the time. That would amount to $194 billion in 2018 dollars. Jeffrey Bezos. Country, USA. Wealth, $138 billion. Bezos' wealth surpassed $100 billion for the first time on November 24, 2017, and he was formally designated the wealthiest person in the world by Forbes on March 6, 2018, with a net worth of $112 billion. The first semi-billionaire on the Forbes Wealth Index, he was named the richest man in modern history after his net worth increased to $150 billion in July 2018. Genghis Khan lived 1162 to 1227. Country, Mongolian Empire. Wealth, lots and lots of land, not much else. Genghis Khan is undoubtedly one of the most successful military leaders of all time. As leader of the Mongol Empire, which at its height stretched from China to Europe, he controlled the largest contiguous empire in history. However, despite his great power, scholars say Genghis never hoarded his wealth. On the contrary, Khan's generosity was key to his influence. One of the bases of his success is sharing the spoils with his soldiers and other commanders, says Morris Rasabi, a distinguished professor of history at Cunny's Queen's College. Jack Weatherford, author of Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World, explains that Mongol soldiers, unlike many pre-modern armies, were banned from taking personal loot. After an area was conquered, every item taken was inventoried by official clerks and then later distributed amongst the military and their families. Genghis still received a share of the spoils, but that hardly made him rich. He built no palace for himself or family, no temple, no tomb, and not even a house, says Weatherford. He was born in a wool jur and he died in a wool jur. At death he was wrapped in felt, like any common person, and then buried.